If you look at TV and movies over the last 20 years, you kind of see a trend. The men on average have gotten really shallow. We rarely see deep men, and when we do, it's kind of strange. We don't know what to do with it. I think it's a reflection of something that's happening in our society. We have a lot of men who lack depth. Men were created to be deep. And if we aren't, I think we're missing a big part of what it is to be a man. Let's find out why today. Let's jump in.
Welcome to the Confident Man Podcast, empowering men with the confidence they need to live their adventure. Now, here is your host, David Maxwell.
I did a triathlon one time in Mobile, Alabama. I'd never done one there, and it started with a swim in the bay. Now, it was a sprint. It wasn't a super long triathlon. I don't do long ones. And it was my first time. I was excited going out of state to do a triathlon. And we started the swim. And the funny thing was the tide must have been out because the water was extremely shallow. I would go to swim and my hands would drag the bottom. So I was like, what's the use? It looked deep, but it wasn't. So I ended up standing and just kind of walking, which later I figured out was probably not the smartest thing to do during the run. But I did it. Today as men, we have a depth problem. We look deep maybe to some people, but a lot of us as men, we're pretty shallow. And the reason is we're so busy. We're so focused on doing stuff and getting things done that we never have time to ask why. Why are we doing it? What is it all about? Men can and should be deep thinkers, but we don't think of them that way. We often put men in just different categories, but very rarely do we put them in that category of someone who has depth. But if you look at history, the philosophers, the poets, the thinkers, the writers, the critics, the authors, they were men. Men were deep thinkers. I'm not saying women aren't. They are, but men are too. You take Aristotle, Dickens, Whitman, Lewis, Soule. It's an important element for men to understand that they were created to be deep. Men are action-oriented, and that's cool, and that's great, but our actions should be based on our depth. You see, if they're not, then our actions kind of become shallow. They become selfish and self-interested. That's why we don't see a lot of men serving today. They don't know how. They're in that shallow water and they've never gone out to the deep. And depth adds meaning to our life and makes us better as men. So we're going to learn today why we need depth as men. We're first going to answer the question, how do we lose depth? And then we're going to show how shallowness hurts us as men. And then we're going to look at how to grow deep. Okay, the first thing we want to talk about is answering the question, how did we lose depth as men? Did we just misplace it? Well, the truth is, if you think about it today, we don't see a lot of deep men portrayed in media. We've seen the rise of the buffoon character. They do it for comic relief, but that seems to be all men. And depth is lost when the generalizations of men are accepted. And I'm afraid people today have just generalized men in a lot of negative ways. We've allowed people to do it as men. We've kind of fallen into that. And a lot of young men growing up just believe the generalizations. When boys are raised only seeing that goofy portrayal of men, and they don't have a dad around who shows them what it is to be a real man, that's what they believe. They believe the movie character. They believe the fictional character. And so many of us think that way. We think, well, all men are like this or like that. And there are plenty of men who lack depth, but it's not all men. And it doesn't have to be you. You don't have to say, well, I'm not deep. You can be. You don't have to accept the generalization. And I think the challenge to depth that happens for a lot of men comes from peer pressure. Many men don't grow and become deep because they have a peer pressure to be like everybody else, to act like everyone else, to be accepted by other people. There's a lot of pressures on men in that. And what we want to do is understand why. Why are we giving into these pressure? What's it all about? Sometimes it's from our peer group. Sometimes it's from people who maybe live on our street, we go to school with or whatever. But sometimes it's people outside our peer group. And sometimes it's media figures. We want to be like so-and-so who's famous. So we work and grind to become like them. And so what we're doing is we're letting our individuality go, and we're kind of becoming just like them. Men have also lost depth today, I think, because they're not challenged to be thinkers. You don't see a lot of men challenged to do deep thinking. How many men contemplate the deep things of life? How many men do you think of are deep thinkers? There's not many. They're out there, but sometimes we accept the generalization ourselves as men. We say, well, I'm not deep. I don't like to think about stuff like that. I just want to go to work, do my job, come home, watch Netflix, eat food, and go to sleep. There's no real depth in that. And the problem with that is even what I mentioned. I mentioned the Netflix and things, but the virtual effect on men has been staggering, where men will spend all of their time thinking about things that aren't real. Thinking about how much they're gaming, or they're going to win the game, and they'll put all their thoughts and efforts into the game, but they won't put that much thought into their purpose in life, where they're going as men. See, you don't want to fill your mind with all that stuff. I'm not saying that all the media stuff is bad. I'm not saying Netflix is bad or video games are bad or any of that stuff. I'm saying that you want to be careful that doesn't become all you do. It doesn't become all you're known for. Just like guys who are into sports. There are some guys who are so into sports, that's all they think about. They only think about sports. They only think about their team, their coach, and they don't even play. They have a job, they have a family, but they're so focused on sports that they've allowed themselves to not really go deep. That's all they think about. And what happens when we're staying in that virtual world, we never think about the deeper issues of life. We don't think about purpose. We don't think about character. We kind of become survivors, just living day to day, just kind of grinding out, making it to Friday, making it to the weekend, making it to vacation, hoping to get a bonus, but we lose our ability to think. You see, virtual and the media stuff, they're fine, and they can even be positive in a lot of ways. They can give you a break and all that stuff. But we have to be careful that as men, we don't get addicted to that overstimulation. We don't get addicted to it to where we can't hold our attention on something. If you can't hold your attention, how can you think? If your mind bounces from thing to thing to thing, when are you ever going to really contemplate life? When are you going to think about the deep stuff? And even as I say that, a lot of you are like, oh, I don't like to do that. Maybe that's why. Maybe your brain can't hold attention for more than 10 seconds on something. And I'm not blaming anyone. We're all in that boat. And what we have to do is we have to fight against that purposely. We have to choose to be men of depth, men who think. You see, as men, we have to go deep. Our society needs us to go deep. No one makes you a deep thinking man. You choose to walk down that path yourself. And when you do, it makes all the difference in the world. Okay, the second thing we want to look at is how shallowness hurts us. Because I just brought up everything about depth, and you may just say, well, David, I'm not super deep. What's the big deal? Well, I'm not saying we all have to be philosophers or authors or things like that, but we need to have depth as men. If we don't have depth in our life, we'll always stay in the shallow end. And the problem with the shallow end is in life as men, if we stay shallow, we're going to be very image focused. Many men are so focused on the outside that they never really think about their inside. They never think about who they are. Now, we should focus on the outside. We should focus on our physical, and we should do things to stay in shape as men. We should be holistic. I talk about that all the time. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but it's not one or the other. You see, that's the problem is we think, well, I want to be in shape. I want to have a six-pack and all that. That's fine, but you also want to kind of mentally have your own six-pack. Because if you only in one way in shape, but not the other, you're going to be out of balance as a man. If you can build consistent physical training in your life, you should be able to build consistent depth training. You should be someone who can have deep thoughts and you can think through what life is all about. And depth training is really more about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, building up your mind and your character. Shallow men, they don't see that. They don't see their character as important. Their thought process is not important. They just kind of want to survive. Let me do what feels good. Let me do what makes me look good. And again, there is a physical need for us as men, and we should deal with those. We should be in shape, but we also need to be deep. Emotions and feelings, if we ignore them or forget about them, then what happens is we stay in that shallow end, and then the pleasure of the moment and the success of the moment take the priority. And I've seen a lot of men's lives devastated by that. You may have a wife and kids, and then for the pleasure of a moment on a business trip, you have an affair because you didn't learn how to tell your body no. You never dealt with your character and things like that. And so the momentary pleasure brought you in and then brought a lot of devastation to your life. You see, shallow men are focused on winning. They're focused on getting. They're kind of selfish, and they tend to be survivalist. You know, they just think of, oh, one day this is going to happen. One day that's going to happen. One day everything's going to come together, but it never does. So they just kind of grind away in their life. Shallow men are creatures of appetites. They're easily swayed by their own passions, like we just talked about. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be something as devastating as an affair, but a lot of guys who can't get in shape physically, they're having a hard time. It's not because of the physical side. There's things going on emotionally. As a child, they may have bonded to food in such a way that as an adult, it's hard for them to not eat because that food became their comfort as children. Well, if they never deal with that, if they never figure that out, how are they going to overcome their eating? They think, well, I just don't have any willpower. No, there's just some things going on emotionally that you need to deal with. You have to take care of. There's a lot of men out there who'll throw away a lot of things in their life for a momentary fling, a momentary picture of pleasure. And shallow men are masters of justification. They justify their life. They justify their actions. You see, when someone's shallow, they don't think deep about what's going on and why and how come. They think about themselves. We see that all through today. There's a lot of politicians out there, and they're about as deep as where I was swimming for that triathlon. They think about themselves. They think about what's going on. They think about how much money they're going to make. They don't really think about the consequences of what's coming down the line. I mean, our country's $30 trillion in debt. Obviously, someone in Washington is not really thinking about the long-term effect of what they're doing. They're justifying their actions in the moment. And what does that show? It shows a lack of depth. It shows that they're being very shallow. And a lot of people who are shallow spend all their mental energy focused on getting things for themselves. And they justify it. I'm going to get mine. What's the big deal if I get mine? See, that's shallow thinking. Deep thinking is when you think about the consequences to everybody. You think about the big picture. But when you're shallow, you just think about yourself. You just think about you getting yours and not really caring about other people. Shallow men also don't have deep, meaningful relationships. They don't pick their partners based on depth, but on the visual. I've talked about before where guys sometimes will pick the women in their life based upon what other guys think of them. They're picking someone to impress their friends more than finding a woman of character and depth. They want someone who makes them look good. You know, oh, she's super beautiful, so I want her by me because it makes me look good. How shallow is that? What about picking someone who really is going to be a soulmate, someone that you can connect to relationally? Well, shallow men can't do that because they can't build a deep relationship because they don't have any depth. And then a lot of women are out there going, how come there's no men of depth out there? Because we've created a bunch of shallow men. And this hurts these guys in finding a long-term relationship. That's why so many guys can't stay in a marriage or can't stay in a relationship. And it hurts them when they try to relate to their children too. When a man is shallow, he doesn't have the emotional depth to connect with his children. If you as a dad want to connect to your teenager, you do it through emotions. But if you don't really understand your own emotions, you won't understand theirs. And a lot of times men will blame the children for the lack of a relationship. And even at work, it can happen this way. If you're a shallow man at work, you don't think about other people's feelings. You don't think about what's going on at work. You don't think about the big picture. You think about what's going to get you the bonus, what's going to make you look good. And so you kind of use people, and they're going to figure that out. And so they're not going to follow you. And that's where we have to understand that as men, shallowness hurts us. So we don't want to be shallow, because shallowness is going to keep us from really experiencing what it is to be a man. The third thing we want to talk about is how to grow deep. So we've talked about shallowness, we talked about the depth problem, and so the question is, okay, David, what do we do? How do we grow deep? Well, just asking that question is a start. Being deep doesn't mean you have to change your personality. It doesn't mean that you have to sit in the corner and brood all the time. Fun, life of the party people can be just as deep as an introvert who does sit in the corner reading a book. We have to understand that things don't mean depth. Like you can have a lot of education and not be deep. There are plenty of well-educated people who are super shallow. We were just talking about a lot of our politicians. They're very well educated, but many of them are super shallow. You see, depth as a man is when we know ourselves and we think through our purposes in life. We think about why we're here, what's going on. I call it the inward journey. And what we have to do as men is we have to begin finding ways to grow in understanding our own thoughts and feelings. Many men don't know where to start. I sure didn't. I was 30 years old when I started this journey for myself. And I started by doing counseling, going to small groups, talking with people. I was getting coaching. I was learning how to journal. I was reading books. I was doing all of these things. And that really began my growth in depth. Nobody told me I had to do it. Nobody made me do it. I just began to get hungry to be deep. I wanted to be a better man. I wanted to be a man of depth. So I started taking that inward journey. Now, was it easy? No, it was incredibly hard. But what you have to do as a man is discover, where am I going to start? And you start by just asking the question and then thinking about, what can I do to become deeper as a man? Maybe it starts by just reading different books. And you say, well, I hate to read. Well, get an Audible membership and listen to books while you commute. Don't let an excuse keep you from growing as a man. Maybe it's getting coaching. Maybe it's finding people who can pour into your life, people who can help you and mentor you. Maybe it's journaling, beginning to write down what you think and feel. And maybe you need to go to counseling. You know what counseling is? I tell men all the time, counseling is just emotional and mental coaching. Why would you not want coaching in an area? Professional athletes still get coaching, even though they're the best of the best. So I think as men, sometimes we think, well, I don't need counseling. You know, we all need some coaching at different times in our life. And counseling is one of those things that it may just be for a short season. It may just be for a couple months. But it might be that perfect thing to get you on that journey of depth. I don't know what it's going to be for you. I just know that you've got to start somewhere. You got to pick. You got to start doing. Because when we grow deep, we build our life on a purpose and not on pleasure. We don't just live for the pleasure of the moment. We find a purpose in our life. We find meaning in our life, which is going to bring meaning to every area of our life, which will give us a more satisfying life. We're not just going to go from thing to thing to thing. I've got to have the new this. I've got to have the new that. And so what we have to do is start asking that question, why am I here? What is my purpose here? Am I just here to make money? Am I just here to pay off a house? Am I just here to pay for my children's school? I think we're here for much more than that. We have to start asking the question, what kind of legacy do I want to leave? And the question of, how do I want to really make a difference in other people's lives? To make a real difference in other people's lives. You see, money and success is what a lot of men live for, but they're not the most important thing. And it's funny, we'll say that, but our lifestyle usually is the opposite. We live very different from what we say. But when you understand the purpose of money and success, you can put it in its proper place. I'm not saying you shouldn't work hard. You should. I'm not saying you can't have vision and goals and take care of business and do all that. You should do that. But you should understand it's not your purpose in life. It may be part of your role. It may be part of what you do, but it's not your ultimate purpose. And the other question is, what kind of deep relationships do you have? Do you have friends in your life where you can have a real conversation with, where you can go to them and say, hey, I'm getting my head kicked in right now. I'm really discouraged. Have you ever had that conversation with a friend? A lot of men haven't because they don't know how to do it, or they don't have friends they feel like they could have that kind of relationship with. If you're married, what kind of relationship do you have with your wife? Is it an intimate relationship, or are y'all just partners? Have y'all just learned how to raise children in an efficient way together instead of really being people who love each other, people who are intimate and share things together? What are you reading or listening to challenge your thinking? This year, I've been doing some new things to challenge my own thinking. I've been reading books from different authors. Like I just read a book by a guy named Thomas Sowell. It's an incredible book, very deep thinker. It challenges me to listen to it. I'm doing a thing this year where I'm focusing on C.S. Lewis books. So I'm reading some of his books and listening to things about him and doing courses about C.S. Lewis and kind of his depth as a man. And I'm doing those things just to challenge myself to be a deeper thinker. What are you doing? Are you reading? Are you listening to podcasts? What things are out there that could challenge you? Maybe it's a biography of great men. You know, it doesn't have to be like a course on things. You don't have to go back to school to become deep. You could just listen to biographies of men in the past who've done great things, and that could challenge you to maybe go deeper yourself. Fiction can even challenge you. You know, a lot of people think, well, I'm not ever going to read fiction. Why not? It stimulates your brain. Why not read a story that happens in adventure? Because a lot of times that challenges us as men to be more adventurous. It challenges us and makes us think about things in a different way. It actually does different things to our brain. So don't cut out on fiction in your life. And maybe you replace some of that virtual TV or gaming with reading or listening to books. That's one thing I do. I listen to fiction books a lot of times when I'm driving because it kind of helps me pass the time. And I just like fiction stories. It kind of brings you in and my mind gets stimulated by them. And I think that's something we need to do. The key for you is not to copy someone else, but just to do something. Start the journey, see where it goes. That's the exciting part of being a man, is we get to each live our own adventure. So start today choosing to go on your adventure as a man. Okay, gentlemen, in conclusion, I just want to say, don't accept the lie that you can't be deep as a man. Don't accept the shallowness that our society has put on so many men today. You can go deep, but it doesn't happen by accident. You've got to begin to challenge yourself to get out of the shallow end. Now, it's going to take work. It's not going to be easy, but just start doing it one foot in front of the other. Just start by doing one thing. Pick a book to read, pick a podcast to listen to, whatever. Look at your relationships and look at how deep they are. Maybe you need to find some men to be in a close friendship with. Maybe you and your wife need to kind of rekindle those intimate conversations where you really go deep with each other. It's an exciting adventure when you choose to do it. I'm not saying it's not going to be scary. I'm not saying you're going to do it all right, but you'd rather be trying and doing than sitting back and doing nothing. Because the fact is, we need deep men in our society. We need you to become deep.
You've been listening to the Confident Man Podcast. Click subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. You can connect with David on Facebook and Instagram at David the Maxwell. Find resources to help you as a man at theconfidentman.me. That's theconfidentman.me.